Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Assembly Committee on Judiciary. I will call this meeting to order. Madam Secretary, would you please call the roll?
Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod.
Here.
Assemblywoman Cohen.
Here.
Assemblywoman Gonzalez.
Here.
Assemblywoman Hanson.
Here.
Assemblywoman Hardy.
Here.
Assemblywoman Kasama.
Here.
Assemblywoman Krasner. Assemblywoman Marzola.
Here.
Assemblyman Miller.
Here.
Assemblywoman Wynn.
Here.
Assemblyman O'Neill.
Here.
Assemblyman Orentlicker.
Here.
Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong.
Here.
Assemblyman Wheeler.
Here.
Chairman Yeager.
Here. Please mark Assemblywoman Krasner absent excused this morning. Everyone else is present. That means we do have a quorum. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 61 of the Nevada Legislature, which means we just have 59 more days until we perhaps get supervised release from the building. So welcome to committee members. Welcome to the guests joining us on the Zoom. We have a number of you this morning, and welcome to those who may be watching on the internet, either at the legislature's website or on our YouTube channel. Before we get started on today's agenda, just a few quick housekeeping matters. For the guests who are joining us on the Zoom, if you could please mute yourself unless you're speaking, that will help with some of the audio feedback that we sometimes get. If you are presenting or answering questions today, if you could please remember to state your name each time before you speak. That will help our committee secretaries prepare accurate minutes. We do expect courtesy and respect in our interactions with one another. We don't always agree on policy. That's perfectly fine, but we need to make sure we're being respectful of one another, the legislative process, and most importantly, our very hardworking staff. Finally, many members are using multiple devices to access this virtual meeting, so please don't see it as a sign of disrespect or inattention if members appear to be looking away during certain times at today's meeting. With that behind us, we're going to move on to our agenda. Committee, as you can see, there's just one bill on the agenda this morning, and I will be helping to present that bill. So at this time, I'm going to hand that virtual gavel over to our very able vice chair, and I will take the virtual presentation table.
Thank you, Chair Yeager. At this time, I will open the bill hearing on Assembly Bill 341. It does provide for the licensure and regulation of cannabis consumption lounges. And with that, I will turn this over to our chair to begin when ready.
Good morning, Madam Vice Chair, members of the Assembly Judiciary Committee. Thankful today is Friday. For the record, I am Steve Yeager, representing Assembly District 9 in Southwest Las Vegas. It is an honor to present Assembly Bill 341 to you this morning. I intend to make fairly brief introductory remarks, and then I'm going to hand it over to some other folks we have on the Zoom with us. First will be Scott Rutledge to take you through the bill and the amendment, which you can find on Nellis. And then we're going to hear from Tina Ullman, Nicole Buffong, Christina Thomas, John Hudak, and Chris Sage before taking any questions. I know that sounds like a lot of people to present, but I think we'll be able to get this done in about a half an hour before we get to questions. And as you might expect, there are many, many people who would like to testify on this bill, so I'm sure we'll hear a good amount of testimony this morning. Assembly Bill 341 takes on the somewhat vexing issue of public consumption of cannabis. Ever since Nevada voters approved adult use cannabis, we have struggled with the idea of public consumption. The voter initiative expressly outlawed public consumption. That might have made sense then, but it sure doesn't now. More than 40 million tourists visit Las Vegas every year, and there are certainly many more that visit other parts of the state. Many of those are interested in trying cannabis, but there's nowhere they can legally do so. They can't bring it into their hotel rooms. They can't consume outside. As a result, many of them end up breaking the law unless they happen to know somebody who lives in Nevada and can provide a space for consumption. But it's not just the tourists. There are locals who have nowhere to consume as well. Perhaps they rent and they are forbidden from consuming by their landlord. Perhaps they live in subsidized housing where federal restrictions would apply. Or perhaps they just don't want to consume in their homes for personal reasons. Where can they go? Nowhere. Assembly Bill 341 remedies this problem by providing for public consumption at well-regulated venues, whether associated with an existing dispensary or whether a standalone establishment. I think it would even be fair to say that AB 341 ultimately decriminalizes consumption by finally providing us with a public policy that allows for it. AB 341 also is an economic development measure in that it will result in additional revenue for the state while also providing new and exciting business opportunities, especially for those who have been shut out of the industry to this point, including those who have been adversely impacted by the war on drugs. Thus, social equity is a big driver for this bill. You'll be hearing about that today from some of the other speakers. Additionally, you're going to hear about the various provisions that will go into the proper regulation of these businesses, from safe consumption protocols, employee training to mitigate the risks associated with overconsumption, and how these businesses can provide an opportunity to educate and inform novice cannabis consumers. You're also going to hear some exciting testimony this morning about what might be in store for Nevada in this area. The possibilities are really limitless, which speaks to the intent of this legislation. The goal isn't to define what is possible with these business models, but to provide operational requirements and safeguards that will prove to be the foundation for a well-regulated cannabis consumption lounge. This bill has certainly been a long time coming, and it's been a team effort with participation from way too many people for me to name right now. But the bottom line is we simply cannot wait another 2 years to get this right. The time is now, and I hope you'll support Assembly Bill 341. Madam Vice Chair, at this time, I'd like to hand it over to Mr. Scott Rutledge, who has been working furiously on this legislation for a very long time. With your permission, Madam Vice Chair, he'll take you through the bill and the amendment, and then we'll have some additional speakers after him.
No, that works fine. Mr. Rutledge, please state your name for the record, and I'll just remind all the speakers to do so before they speak.
Good morning, Madam Vice Chair, committee members. My name is Scott Rutledge. That's SCOT-RUTLEDGE. Yes, you will notice the absence of a superfluous T in my first name. Thank my mother for that. Wanted to take you through the bill this morning and then walk you through the amendment, as Chairman Yeager noted. I'd also like to note that this is still a work in progress. There are a couple amendments that we have yet to finalize. We're still working with a couple of different agencies and organizations. So we do plan on having some additional amendments, but I think what we'll present today is a good start. As far as the bill itself, essentially, as Chairman Yeager noted, what we're trying to accomplish is creating safe, well-regulated places for the public to be able to consume cannabis. Currently, I don't think anybody is a stranger to the fact that you can smell that smell just about anywhere. You're traveling in southern Nevada for sure, and probably also up in different parts of northern Nevada. Obviously, a big part of that is our tourism. Our visitors come here, they purchase cannabis, and we've not provided anywhere for them to safely consume. And so these venues, these lounges, will give us the opportunity to not only direct those visitors, those tourists, to these venues, but it's also going to provide a safe place for locals to consume, especially locals who are unable to consume at home. And you'll hear a little bit about that today and why that might be the case. So Section 2 of this bill generally designates these businesses as cannabis consumption lounges. Sections 3 and 5 designate two types of consumption lounges. There's a retail consumption lounge defined in Section 5, and that basically means a lounge that's attached to an existing cannabis business, a retail store. Section 3 defines an independent cannabis consumption lounge to mean a business by which the consumption of cannabis or cannabis products is allowed, but is not attached to an adult use cannabis store. Existing law prohibits a person from engaging in the business of an adult use cannabis establishment unless they have been issued an adult use cannabis establishment license. Section 7 addresses that. Section 10 prohibits the board from issuing an adult use cannabis establishment license or a retail cannabis consumption lounge unless that applicant holds an adult use cannabis establishment license or an adult use cannabis retail store, and the location of the proposed retail cannabis consumption lounge is attached or immediately adjacent to that retail store. Sections 10 and 14 of the bill exempt a proposed retail cannabis lounge from certain restrictions relating to the location of an adult use cannabis establishment. Section bill requires the board to adopt regulations establishing criteria to determine whether an applicant for the issuance or renewal of an adult use cannabis establishment license or a retail cannabis lounge or an independent cannabis lounge qualifies as a social equity applicant, which is defined by Section 9 of the bill, generally as an applicant that has been adversely affected by previous laws that criminalized activity relating to cannabis. Section 12 requires the board to adopt regulations establishing criteria of merit and scoring guidelines to be used in evaluating applications for such licenses, and requires the board to give an additional positive weight to social equity applicants' applications. Section 17 of the bill requires the board to establish fees for the issuance and renewal of such licenses, as well as reduce fees for social equity applicants. Section 16 of the bill makes a conforming change to reflect the addition of the requirements of the section. Existing law also prohibits the board from issuing more than a certain number of adult use cannabis establishment licenses. Section 15, which actually we'll go through in a minute, was amended out of the bill, and we'll discuss why. Sections 22 and 24 of this bill set forth certain requirements and restrictions relating to the operation. Section 23 authorizes a lounge to engage in certain activities. Section 20 requires the board to adopt regulations concerning these lounges. Section 25 authorizes a lounge to obtain cannabis or cannabis products from an adult use cannabis retail store. Section 25 also authorizes a retail cannabis consumption lounge to prepare and sell ready-to-consume cannabis products. You'll be hearing a little bit about that from one of our presenters, Mr. Chris Sage. Section 4 of the bill defines ready-to-consume cannabis product, meaning an adult use cannabis edible product that is presented as a foodstuff or beverage and is intended for immediate consumption. Section 28 requires the board to adopt regulations establishing requirements for the preparation and sale of those products. Sections 19 and 30 of the bill provide certain requirements for cannabis products established under existing law that do not apply to ready-to-consume cannabis products. Addresses things like labeling, etc. Section 26 of the bill requires an independent cannabis lounge to allow cannabis or cannabis products to be delivered. Section 26 also prohibits, with certain exceptions, an independent cannabis lounge from acquiring or selling cannabis. Section 27 of this bill authorizes an independent consumption lounge to submit a request to the board to sell cannabis or cannabis products. And if the board approves such a request, Section 27 authorizes the independent lounge to do a few things. We're going to talk a little bit about the independent cannabis lounge model and why we wanted to allow that flexibility. Section 34 applies to the excise tax, retail sales of cannabis. Section 31 and 33 makes conforming changes to reflect the imposition of such a tax. 18 and 19 revise provisions of existing law prohibiting the consumption of cannabis and cannabis products in a public place or in a cannabis establishment for the purpose of authorizing a person to engage in such activities in a lounge. Section 36 exempts a cannabis lounge whose activities are confined to those authorized under the provision of this bill from the application of this provision. Definitions are, of course, included. We make some more conforming changes, et cetera, et cetera. The bill itself, when it was first drafted, was based on a policy outline that was provided from several months of conversation amongst various stakeholders. We were ultimately trying to provide for, with these two license types, we initially were calling them retail attached permissive use. And permissive use for the independent lounge essentially meant that business owner would have some flexibility in the type of business they wanted to open. We all know that there's a cost associated with the inventory controls, et cetera, that go along with selling cannabis, the POS systems related to that, the other security measures. And so wanted flexibility for somebody who was entering into this industry and wanted to open up an independent cannabis lounge, but may not want to start with selling cannabis. So that would also allow for, in this bill, the delivery of cannabis products to an independent lounge and directing the CCB to provide regulations. Therefore, the same goes for allowing your customers to bring cannabis in with them and developing regulations around that. In the statute, we do clearly explain that those products have to come from a licensed retail store in a sealed package. So again, flexibility for that independent lounge concept. I'd like to walk you through some amendments to the bill right now that we have proposed. And then if there are specific questions related to the amendments and whatnot, I'd be happy to answer them once I'm done, or we can wait for the other presentations and then perhaps you could ask the questions of the group. However you would like to proceed, Vice Chair.
I think we'll just finish up with the other presenters that are on in the queue, and then we'll take questions at the end.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice Chair. So under the amendments, again, these amendments, by the way, were also a product of conversations with a number of other interested parties, including cannabis lobbyists and agencies, et cetera. We're hoping that the next amendment will finalize that process. But as stated again, we're still in the midst of trying to get some clarification around a few items. Now, that being said, we do have some proposed amendment language. Section 9, we wanted to, in this section, explain that a social equity applicant would only apply to an independent cannabis lounge, not a retail cannabis consumption lounge. And we also, based on some input from another organization working on another piece of legislation that addresses social equity applicants, to remove the definition, the part of the definition that says or on the geographic area in which the applicant will operate. We really want social equity applicants to be about the individuals applying and not focusing on a geographic area. Of course, the CCB will go through the promulgation of regulations on this, and we may see some more texture to social equity applicants, but for the statute, this is how we'd like it stated. Section 10, basically, we wanted to remove the last part of subsection 2, and that, I think, basically has to do with part of the zoning discussion. Section 11, the board shall adopt regulations establishing criteria to be used by the board for determining whether an applicant for the issuance or renewal of an adult use cannabis establishment license or an independent cannabis consumption lounge qualifies as a social equity applicant. So that, again, just goes back to the change in Section 9. Under Section 12, we also wanted to address the idea of not allowing monopolies to take place in this new industry with these new licenses. So in addition to adding the conforming change in 3 subsection B, that the add additional positive weight to a social equity applicant would apply to an independent cannabis consumption lounge license. In Section 4, we also wanted to state that the board shall not issue more than 1 cannabis consumption lounge license in the same county to an ownership group individual or an individual with an ownership stake in a group. And so that essentially means that if you're a retailer that would like to open up a lounge, you get to open up 1 lounge, even if you have 5 locations. This could, of course, be changed in the future, but as far as launching the program, we wanted to make sure that nobody had a overarching competitive advantage in being able to open up more than 1 venue. The same would be true for independent lounge owners. We did not want to see someone try to come into this marketplace and open up a chain of consumption lounges. That being said, we struck Section 15 from the bill because that also related to anti-monopolistic practices. We think that subsection 4 of Section 12 better gets to that point. In Section 20, subsection 9, we just wanted to include some more clarifying language, enabling language on the board setting forth rules on procedures and requirements for employee training on consumption of single-use cannabis and ready-to-consume cannabis products, which then conforms with Section 22. We wanted to be sure that inside these consumption lounges, that as opposed to it being a free-for-all for the type of cannabis that could be purchased, that we work with the board to define single-use cannabis product so that we can limit the types of products that are consumed in these venues. And that's what Section 22 does. We will define, by the way, single-use cannabis and ready-to-consume cannabis products in the regulatory process. So you'll see those terms pop up, and be assured that, you know, we will get into a more detailed description of those regulation. We also added in Section 24 that you may not remove cannabis products that are purchased at a lounge. It's the same concept as a bar. These products are intended to be consumed on site, not to be taken home. This essentially eliminates the possibility of these venues becoming de facto retail stores. That's not the goal here. These are meant to be cannabis bars, if you will, where you purchase your product, consume it, and leave. Which also then is why we need to address the issue of cannabis waste in these venues. Again, the CCB will be promulgating regulations as it relates to how to safely handle that. We also talk about in Section 25 that how a retail cannabis lounge may obtain those products and sell them, and that they're selling single use. Section 26 does the same for an independent cannabis consumption lounge. We wanted to make it the same for both lounge types in terms of requiring that they both get to sell the same types of products and that they both acquire their products in the same fashion. We're still working on some language for Section 26. We expect a new amendment around that. In terms of Section 27, we talk about the ready-to-consume and single-use products, how those will be, actually that's the section for independent lounges and where those products shall be purchased. I apologize. 26 is an enabling language similar to 25 in terms of being able to purchase and sell. So for Section 27, this focuses on an independent lounge, and if they choose to sell cannabis, the process by which they will go through an application with the board requesting permission. Section 28, we included the term safe handling in subsection 2, and also, again, for conforming purposes, added single use before cannabis products in subsection 4. And then under Section 37, we wanted to include Section 9. Section 9 essentially provides the same type of liability protections for a cannabis lounge as it does for a bar or restaurant that serves alcohol. We've added that and essentially just used the same statute for alcohol to apply to cannabis. And I believe that is the end of the presentation on the amendments for now. I appreciate the committee's time, and Vice Chair Wen, thank you for allowing me to present today. I'll turn it back over to Chairman Yeager to ask the next presenter to speak. Thank you again, Chairman Yeager, for inviting me to participate today.
Thank you, Mr. Rutledge. Steve Yeager for the record. And Madam Chair, we have a few other folks who want to offer fairly brief comments. If you would allow, I'd like to go next to Ms. Tina Ullman, who is an Assembly District 9 constituent. So it's good to see you. Please go ahead.
Good morning, Vice Chair Wen and members of the committee. My name is Christina Ullman. That is ChristianaUlman. First, I want to say thank you to my representative, Chairman Yeager, for sponsoring this much needed legislation and for being a wonderful representative for District 9. I have been the proud resident of Nevada for over 12 years, and I'm a graduate of the UNLV William H. Harrah College of Hospitality. I have been privileged to work in the industry for over 13 years and build an incredible life here in Las Vegas. Like so many residents and tourists, I thrive off the fun, the innovation, and the excitement that our city has to offer, but not just as a resident, but as a leader in the cannabis industry and community. For the past 2.5 years, I've been the brand manager for one of the top selling cannabis brands in Nevada, Old Pal. And I recognized early on the opportunity to help shape the market that we could be proud of as both Nevadans and as passionate cannabis leaders. Last fall, my colleagues and I were inspired to start the Chamber of Cannabis, a nonprofit that unifies professionals who strive to build a more inclusive industry. We focus on strengthening commerce, restoring justice, and positively impacting our community so that our association can ensure Nevada will lead the nation in best practices. We see the clear opportunity Nevada has to create a safe place for consumers to use cannabis and not be criminalized. We also recognize the opportunity to boost tourism and economic growth after a devastating 2020. Cannabis consumers in the industry are eager to take the next step to cannabis commerce. Not only have we shattered stereotypes and stigmas so often associated with cannabis, but we have set a high bar on how the plant can change so many lives for the better, including many who are not believers. Concerning the two new license types for cannabis consumption, both existing retail and independent businesses would be able to apply, and both would operate almost identically with a few exceptions. First, both license types would be allowed to sell cannabis and even create new products on site in the form of ready-to-consume infused food and beverages. Second, independent cannabis consumption lounges would have the ability to choose whether or not to sell cannabis products in their business model. If they opt out to not sell cannabis, regulations will be put in place to allow for delivery of cannabis to their customers from a licensed retail cannabis store. They may also choose to have their customers bring in legal cannabis into their venue in a sealed package from a licensed retail cannabis store. The goal is to provide flexibility in order to reduce operational cost, which might be considered for social equity applicants or an entrepreneur who is not sure if they actually want to sell cannabis, but still wants to participate in the industry. In conclusion, we ask you to consider what we think is good public policy that decriminalizes consumption and provides for new opportunities in a more inclusive and diverse industry. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Madam Vice Chair, with your permission, I'd like to go next to Nicole Buffong.
That work?
Good morning to members of the committee and Vice Chair Nguyen. For the record, my name is Nicole Buffong, spelled Nicole Buffong. Personally, I'm a cannabis patient and the reason I moved to Nevada. Professionally, I am a cannabis advocate and community educator. I am the Active Nevada State Director for Minorities for Medical Marijuana and Director of Medical Voices for the Chamber of Cannabis. I am here today representing both of these nonprofits in support of Assembly Bill 341. Both of these organizations have memberships that are diverse and represent all aspects of Nevada's cannabis industry, focused on strengthening commerce, diversity, while advocating for social equity, medical cannabis users' rights, and cannabis law reform. We would like to thank Chairman Yeager for sponsoring this piece of critical cannabis legislation. Nevada's cannabis sector is still a relatively new industry, but it has unfortunately repeated many of the same failures of other industries regarding social equity. Without intentional policy to drive inclusion, diversity, and equity in ownership at the executive level, leadership will remain lacking. One issue to consider in the future scoring of social equity applicants should be the opportunity for these applicants to amend and revise any deficiencies in their application if they fail to meet a minimum threshold. While we recognize that this should be a function of the regulatory process, we think it is important to mention this on the record during this hearing. I would also point to an article published by the Pew Charitable Trust in January of this year that highlights many of the challenges in successfully implementing a social equity licensing process. I will include a copy of this story in my written testimony for you to review. In Nevada, per the initial demographic report published by the Cannabis Compliance Board in January, the portion of owners, senior managers, board of directors, and executive board members are disproportionately overrepresented by white Americans and underrepresented by Latino Americans, African Americans, and Asian Americans. Nevada, through this initial step of creating new cannabis license classifications, has a unique opportunity to create intentional pathways for diversity through ownership, employment, upward mobility into management positions, supply chain vendor procurement, and community reinvestment. This is an important first step to bring social equity applicants to the marketplace. Social use lounges will build a new sector of diverse owners and operators. These new licenses will help drive more minority business owners, which is critical in creating generational wealth within disadvantaged communities in Nevada. We are confident that these new diverse groups of operators will have the creative vision to build lounges that are experiential and fun, but we believe some will also focus on the health-conscious consumer. We understand that training staff that work at these facilities to recognize overconsumption will be a necessary component, and we look forward to the future opportunity to work with the CCB in promulgating regulations that will ensure safe consumption and the mitigation of risk. While we have more work to do over the next few years, including the potential for further economic empowerment policy efforts, Assembly Bill 341 is an important first step in changing the trajectory for communities of color in Nevada. We strongly support this bill and will work with the legislator and the CCB to ensure its success. Thank you so much, committee and Chair Yeager, for allowing me to speak today.
Thank you, Mrs. Long. I think Chair Yeager, do you next have Ms. Christina Thomas?
Yes.
Go ahead again, Ms. Thomas.
Blessings and greetings, Vice Chair Wynn and committee members, everyone that is present. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Ms. Thomas. Go ahead.
Good. My name is Christina Thomas, spelled CHRISTINATHOMAS. This is for the record. I am an Air Force veteran, the Director of Veterans Voices for the Chamber of Cannabis, and the Chair of Southern Nevada's Veterans Advocacy Council formed under the Veterans Administration. I am also a small business owner and holistic entrepreneur, certified in mind-body medicine, and a medical certified cannabis consultant through Pacific College of Health and Science. Most importantly, I am a wife, a mother, an advocate for my veteran peers, and a miracle medical cannabis patient. I am here to testify in support of Assembly Bill 341. Based on most of the conversations you'll hear regarding cannabis consumption lounges, many of the lounges will be used for recreational consumption, similar to a bar or lounge, which I absolutely support because of cannabis consumers deserve a safe place to consume socially without fear of breaking the law or paying a fine. I also see another opportunity for some of these licenses to be used to provide our community, my computer just glitched, but that's okay. As a survivor of military trauma and serving those that live through their trauma, it's imperative that I give voice to their needs. And one of those opportunities is creation of a cannabis wellness center that will be an option under the independent lounge licenses found in AB 341. These businesses could be modeled after a number of health center models that exist today, such as yoga studios, mind-body centers, rehabilitation centers, massage therapy, and other wellness practices. It is my hope that individuals who are looking for a way to have a safe consumption experience with regulated cannabis products for the benefit of their health and wellness, and they can find this under these new license types. As a certified medical cannabis consultant, I work with patients all over the world that currently must navigate without the ability to try their products due to their lack of safe consumption venues. Many of my clients that visit have no other choice but to learn at my private resident or NuWu, which has a recreational business model that may not be considered a comfortable place that is conducive to their healing process. With patients here in Nevada, I have had success providing them with a private residence and safe space for them to work on their healing and wellness, which includes my recommendations on which cannabis products they can have and should use. This is also added for those that we've asked to have education in these facilities. It has been a very rewarding experience to see trauma victims work through their process and come out on the other side feeling whole with a renewed faith in life and able to trust others. Veterans and other trauma patients, whether locals or tourists, need safe, verified access to their plant medicine and deserve compassionate, holistic care in safe places. My own journey to learn about cannabis plant medicine was difficult for many reasons due to my illness, especially when it came to trying new products with proper guidance. It would have been much easier to have had a space to visit that understood cannabis, offered advice on methods of use, and even provided regulated products with certified analysis. Additionally, as a minority woman and a disabled veteran, even with the financial freedom to start my own business, I could not afford and did not have the political connections to get a license in the early rounds of licensing in Nevada. We must find better ways to be more inclusive to veterans, disabled members of the community, BIPOC communities, and those disenfranchised by the war on drugs. I think we can all agree that this is important, that this is something that needs to happen. Additionally, as a minority woman and a disabled veteran, I think that if I don't speak out, that we should at least be able to look to others and find out what we need. I think that we can all agree that Nevada must do better when it comes to social equity, diversity, and inclusion across many industries. As for AB 341, I see it as a great first step towards achieving these goals that will positively affect my community's socioeconomic status through these new opportunities in the cannabis industry. I think it's important that I add, I appreciate all of you and all of your hard work that you've done thus far. It is important. I can speak for all of those that are veterans that we truly appreciate all of your hard work. And I want to thank you all for your time and considerations. Blessing, peace, and wellness to all of you. I appreciate you. That is my closing remarks. Thank you, Vice Chair Nguyen. Thank you, Assemblyman Yeager.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. I think next up we have Mr. Hudak. Go ahead and unmute and begin when you're ready.
Great, thank you. Good morning, Vice Chair Nguyen, Chairman Yeager, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today regarding AB 341. My name is John Hudak, that's spelled John Hudak. I'm a senior fellow in governance studies and the deputy director of the Center for Effective Public Management at the Brookings Institution. I'm also a senior fellow at the Brookings Mountain West program at UNLV. In many ways, I consider Nevada my home away from home, as I spend a significant amount of time in the state with the honor of teaching some of Nevada's future leaders and conducting research on issues relevant to the state, including cannabis policy, immigration, medical education, and federal grants policy. Before I begin, I need to note that my testimony for the record today represents my own views and is not an institutional position of the Brookings Institution. AB 341 is an important piece of legislation that would bring cannabis consumption lounges to the state. I'll discuss with you today two general areas that such policy will have a benefit. First, meeting consumer demand in the state of Nevada, and second, addressing issues of social and racial equity in the state's cannabis policies. I'll discuss each in order. There's a serious demand for commercial locations in which cannabis can be used safely, securely, discreetly, and legally. As the chairman noted in his opening remarks, that demand is not simply from tourists, but that demand is significant for residents of Nevada as well. In addition, we know that policies around use that are woven into the cannabis system in Nevada are not designed to be discriminatory, but they are discriminatory in practice. There's a racial impact as people of color, young people, new Americans, and legal immigrants are much more likely to rent than whites are. And while that area of cannabis, as I said, is not designed to be discriminatory, it does have those effects by biasing against those people exactly, those groups exactly. Providing lounges ensures greater equity and access for individuals across the state of Nevada, whether they are residents or tourists, who seek to use cannabis in a responsible and legal way, and in a way that does not create additional challenges for them. In addition, Nevada would not be the first jurisdiction to implement such establishments to meet consumer demand, be it residential demand or tourist demand. Other states and municipalities have either approved cannabis consumption lounges or some version of the same. Those policies are not untested choices made in legalization's early days that jurisdictions are now seeking to reverse. Quite the contrary. They are choices being made as more states choose to reform their laws, including some of the 8 states that have approved adult use legalization in just the past 5 months across the United States. In touching on social justice and racial equity, I'd like to build on some of the great comments from Ms. Buffon in her testimony earlier. And more important than market demand in the state are these issues precisely of social and racial justice and equity that are inherently tied to cannabis consumption lounge policy and the design and implementation of that policy. As I noted above, the demographics of renting versus home ownership inject race, age, and other status-based aspects to this conversation. However, those issues do not end there. As designed, AB 341 would use the category of independent consumption lounges as an opportunity for the cannabis industry to be more inclusive and to provide additional ownership and management opportunities to people of color, to women, to new Americans, to first-time entrepreneurs, and to people directly impacted by the war on drugs. The social equity applicant category among independent lounges recognizes that most existing licensees in Nevada do not fall into the category of people eligible under the social equity heading. The social equity prioritization for licensure of independent lounges also presents additional opportunities for those applicants. Because these lounges will have fewer capital costs, startup costs, and relatively lower license fees than other types of cannabis businesses, this policy has the opportunity to benefit the precise individuals the social equity category seeks to boost. It can also ensure not just entry into the cannabis industry and cannabis ownership space, but also the ability to succeed and to thrive. Next, and related to licensure, cannabis consumption lounges present an opportunity for the state to right some of the wrongs involved in the early rounds of licensure for the cannabis industry. It has become clear that the first round of licensing in the state could have been more equitable, and that the system left out a lot of prospective business owners who could have boosted the diversity of the ownership class in cannabis. That lack of diversity happened in part because of the licensing process itself, and in part because of the barriers to entry into the system as designed. Licensing cannabis consumption lounges offers those same individuals who were left out initially a renewed opportunity. Finally, if AB 341 passes, regulators must be committed to and have the legal authority to promulgate regulations that seek to level the playing field for independent cannabis consumption lounges. As I noted above, there will be some advantages for existing ownership who choose to open retail consumption lounges. The Cannabis Compliance Board must ensure that regulations allow fair pricing for independent lounges and work tirelessly to ensure that there are not structural market disadvantages for independent consumption lounges that make it difficult or impossible for them to compete. The last thing that this policy is designed to do is to create 2 categories of businesses: retail lounges that succeed and independent lounges that are destined to fail. Design, regulation, and oversight are key. And that effort to provide the tools for independent lounges is particularly important given the goal of using independent lounge licensure as a means of boosting diversity in the industry. Nevada cannot afford to design a system that provides unlimited opportunity to retail lounges and the disproportionately white, male, and wealthy owners of those operations, while setting up to fail independent lounges and the potentially diverse owners of those businesses. To conclude, like in any area of cannabis policy, the passage of AB 341 is just the first step toward ensuring a policy that achieves the goals that its sponsors on this committee and public supporters desire. Throughout the legislative and regulatory processes, officials must ask themselves whether the policy is set to benefit the broadest swath of Nevadans, cannabis consumers, and potential business owners alike. In areas where the deck is stacked against those harmed most directly by the drug war, against people of color, against young people and women, flexibility must be provided in the policy to change course. AB 341 has the chance to spur opportunity in a time of serious economic loss and to diversify an industry that is disproportionately white and male owned. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Hudak. I think the last person that we have to testify during this presentation is Chris Sage. Go ahead at this time and unmute and go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you. And I just wanted to give a quick thank you to everybody else. I couldn't, it's incredible to hear from the other presenters such a honest and true portrayal of what everybody is feeling in this industry. Good morning, Vice Chair Wynn and committee members. My name is Chris Sage, spelled CHRISSAYEGH. I am a chef and entrepreneur in the hospitality space for the past 2 decades, and I appreciate the opportunity to present before you this morning on behalf of Chairman Yeager's AB 341, and it is my hope that I can provide the committee with some useful information as you consider the merits of this legislation through my particular skill set and my business's on proceedings over the past 5 years since incorporating. By way of introduction, I am very humbled to say that I have received global recognition for my work in the niche area of cannabis hospitality. Before cannabis hospitality, my background was in molecular cell biology out of the University of California, Santa Cruz. Over the years, I have worked with esteemed organizations such as the National Restaurant Association, the New England Food Show, the American Culinary Federation, and the New Zealand Hospitality Association, amongst many, many others in the hospitality space. In 2019, I was hired to create the dosing standards for the Netflix show called Cooked with Cannabis as well. My work with the National Restaurant Association has been especially rewarding, and I was recently invited to curate and oversee the Cannabis Showcase for their annual show starting in 2020, but now pushed to 2022. I am also currently working on a book with Simon & Schuster that I hope will inspire and educate more people to think about the possibilities of cooking with cannabis on a global scale, as the book will be translated into many languages. Regarding Section 28 of the bill, I'd like to speak on the topic of ready to consume. I have a business that focuses specifically on in-home private dining as well as events in the cannabis space. So this is coming with years of experience within this exact niche that we are discussing. The proper way to cook with cannabis is to understand the process and, more importantly, the quality of the substance. It is important to start with quality, regulated product that has been lab tested. That is one of the most important parts because the experience is only as good as a starting material. In our findings, we see that the majority of people, 50%, enjoy 10 milligrams at a given time. There are about 10% that do not want any, and then the other percentage is made up of any range from 15 milligrams to 150 milligrams. We've collected this data from thousands of dinners and tens of thousands of guests held around the U.S., as well as surveys taken around the globe. The way in which the operator infuses the food or baked goods can be uniform if controlled by the state. However, I believe that this will hurt the creativity of the industry in the long run, as we saw in California, which I was a part of that legislative process for the West Hollywood on-site consumption lounges, and saw it veer from what we had originally proposed into what it is now, and how the legislation is now currently changing to a more acceptable means. I believe that the state should mainly be concerned with the end product dosage, meaning if the dosage is ordered by a consumer that is 15 milligrams, then the state should be concerned solely with the end product is within a 5 to 10% variance of that ordered dosage. We have been able to hire regional chefs with my company and create our specific SOPs, relying on a universal method of dosing, since all of our clients have different tolerance levels, and to us that is the pinnacle of cannabis hospitality, allowing one to have informed consent. SOPs. I also believe that there should be a necessary standard operating procedure for cannabis hospitality. And one thing to think about as you promulgate regulations are reservations. Coursed serving is a great way to titrate, and that is currently what my company offers, is a 3-tier of offerings. Essentially, there is one that is the family style, as we dub it, with certain protocols. And then the next 2 are with coursed out meals. Keeping the doses low and adding up to the tolerance level specified by the individual, and the individual having to be informed and educated prior to choosing that dosage. And I'll go over that and what I mean in just a second. But you can always add more and you can't take it away, similar to salt. And as any great chef knows, you have to season things properly. Observing cannabis consumption and changes in behavior are also important in identifying overconsumption and are part of our current SOP. There are many SOPs necessary for cannabis hospitality operation. This ranges from the initial order of the THC percentage for the customer to the labeling of the dishes to the timing in which the dosage comes in, meaning that you can titrate it over a longer period of time and have a certain effect with the individual, or you can put it all into one dish and that'll have a certain effect for the individual. We advocate for the latter. We advocate for the former. If a customer says that they want every establishment should have the ability to create any type of cuisine that the operator chooses. The main component that is of concern is the informed consent of the consumer. If a consumer says that they want a certain amount of THC, the operator has the duty now to oblige, and a failure to do so is negligence at best, in my opinion. Here are some of the line items from our SOPs, not including all of them, but I'll go over a few here that would get the ball rolling that I would want to elaborate more on as this process continues. Educating the consumer. So we have a picture guide and subsequent verbal explanation to the guests who are attending any one of our private events or public events. Then we have our services director go through and take the orders of each individual person. Creating a guest label for the evening with the dosage, allergies, and anything else that we may need to know about the individual and their seat number as well. The expediter is the only person who touches the cannabis, so there is only one designated person controlling the flow of dosage from our kitchen to our guest. And they communicate with both the kitchen and front of house staff in order to make it as smooth as possible. We don't allow switching of seats, and if there is a switching of seats, then there's certain protocols that we have to follow for that. We incorporate full spectrum extracts, or we have to incorporate CBD into the meal as well. As we all know, the science behind cannabis has been coming up with some incredible new findings over the years, and it's important to recognize that a full spectrum extract has more longevity than any other isolate that is currently on the market, and we as operators should be able to inform our guests about why the true nature of the cannabis plant and plant medicines, including the actual full spectrum and why it's more important to use that than using isolated extract. And our staff is trained on that as well. In addition, we have to train our staff in cannabis hospitality, which means understanding first and foremost the totality of what it means for cannabis hospitality, in addition to recognizing overdosing or including to recognize somebody that comes in already intoxicated, any number of situations in which we would have to deal with in this scenario. In closing, I want to thank the Vice Chair and the committee for allowing me to present today and to discuss these topics. I'd like to thank Chairman Yeager as well for inviting me to participate with my expertise as part of the historical build presentation, one that I believe is the future of our industry. And I'd be happy to answer any questions from the committee as well.
Thank you, Mr. Sage. Chair Yeager, do you have any follow-up remarks, or are you ready to take some questions?
Thank you, Vice Chair Wynn. Steve Yeager for the record. Before we take questions, I just want to say thank you to the committee and the Vice Chair for allowing us a little bit of time to talk about the bill and hopefully provide to you what are some exciting opportunities for the industry. And I hope what you heard in the presentation is that this has been pretty well thought out. We still have some progress to make for sure. And I think you'll hear some of that through the questions and the testimony. But I'm excited about what this could mean for our state. So with that, Madam Vice Chair, we would be happy to answer questions that I'm sure the committee members have.
Thank you. I actually have a couple of questions and also a comment too. I love that our state has become not just an entertainment and gaming destination. At least since I moved here in 1999, you know, there were a lot of chain restaurants and it was a smaller like restaurant community. So I love the fact that we have become kind of a foodie destination. I know, like on our own committee, we have Assemblywoman Alexis Hansen, who has like a foodie like kind of blog on Instagram. I love that we can not only offer like Michelin star restaurants, but we have more and more local restaurants that are creative with their cooking and thriving in the community. And I know in looking at some of this, there are states across the country, and I think California has a couple of these like consumption lounge like licensing that allows these restaurants to kind of thrive. So I do see this as a way to attract like, attract and promote like our cannabis chefs and restaurateurs and other mixologists and foodies in the state of Nevada. Is that how you kind of see some of these independent lounges being able to work within that model? And I'm not sure who that's directed at, but I will just kind of direct it to those presenters.
Steve Yeager,
I
for the
wouldn't mind
record.
jumping in on that.
I was just going to, Madam Chair, I was just going to suggest that maybe Mr. Rutledge could run point for the questions and answer them, or if he would like to designate someone, that might work the best.
Mr. Rutledge, could you go and maybe answer that in the context of this bill and the amendments?
Yes, thank you, Madam Vice Chair. For the record, Scott Rutledge, representing the Chamber of Cannabis today. The ultimate goal with creating the lounge concept, whether it be retail attached or independent, was to allow for flexibility in ideas and creativity. We know that the legislature needs to set some very firm rules about how these businesses should operate, the guidelines that are necessary, and then for the CCB to promulgate the necessary regulations to ensure that we have safe consumption, that by doing this, we're not endangering public, we're not creating a public safety issue, if you will, or a nuisance. I mean, I think everyone can agree today that, the cannabis consumption without a legal, well-regulated place to go is a nuisance in our community, whether it is in your hotels, your sidewalks, parking lots, et cetera. And so, I've toured quite a few facilities over the last 3 years in different states. Some were what I would almost describe as an airport smoking lounge, which is probably the last place most folks want to spend their time consuming cannabis. I mean, to the point where you weren't even allowed to bring in food or beverage, maybe a bottle of water. It was literally a place to get your fix and leave. We've seen some other models where they've tried to, allow just for people to bring their own cannabis in. And while that can work if you allow for certain creativity, we also think that the ability to sell cannabis in these venues is important. And so that really leads to the comment you were making, Vice Chair Wen, and the question about the ready to consume food products. One thing I'd also add, this would also include beverages. I know a lot of people, speaking of Instagram, if you were on Instagram during the pandemic, it was like an interesting sea change. At first, it was a lot of people had, run to the liquor store to buy as much alcohol as they could to begin the pandemic, and then realized somewhere along the way they probably needed to stop drinking so much. And so now all of a sudden it became about these different types of mocktails. And, it was really interesting to see how people were kind of reacting to things. And quite frankly, over the last 2 years, we've seen an explosion in new non-alcoholic beverages. And one of the great things about THC science right now is that they've created products that can be added to these beverages, very low doses, to give you a different effect, but to create the same sort of feeling as when you're drinking alcohol in a sense. So we know that infused beverages and infused cooking are definitely part of the future of this industry. I'd like to hand it over to Mr. Sage for a moment to just speak a little bit about some of his more experiences with this, and maybe other markets that he's worked in. But I will again say that we definitely recognize that there is a huge opportunity to put Nevada on the map as a cannabis cuisine destination.
Mr. Sage?
Thank you. For the record, it's Chris Sage. Thanks, Scott. And Vice Chair Wen, that's exactly the point. What you brought up being that there's a whole community of people that love particularly food, and we eat it 3 times a day. What I have found in my work is that what we're creating here and the journey that we are trying to elaborate through plant medicine, which has always been a part of human history, comes through really well with food. It transcends any race, religion, sex, language barriers that we are currently dealing with, and allows us to open up the conversation literally around the world, which is what I've been able to very fortunately and gratefully have seen firsthand in my experience with being essentially with my business. From New Zealand to Spain to Italy to Canada to South America to North America, everywhere in the world that I've been fortunate enough to speak at, there has been a huge community of people that are very interested in this. And I think that the majority are interested in learning the whole process about this, but really, I think hospitality and cannabis and psychedelics in a more general sense go hand in hand with hospitality. It is the nature of nurturing one another, and cannabis plays a vital role in that entire process. So I think that there's, I can speak for hours on what I've seen with my company, including in LA, now in Miami and in Colorado, how the numbers have dramatically risen and the inquiries have dramatically risen, and the number of emails that we get a day from people wanting to learn this industry in the hospitality realm. So there is a huge, I think this is going to be the largest portion of cannabis, of the cannabis industry moving forward outside of just straight consumption.
Thank you, Mr. Sage. I'm going to get to some other questions here. We have Assemblywoman Shannon Bilbray-Axelrod next.
Thank you, Vice Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I mean, you guys really went over a lot of things, so I appreciate that. My concern is how this lines up with the provisions of the Nevada Clean Indoor Air Act. I'm just wondering, well, I know it wouldn't be in compliance because I'm pretty sure that it doesn't even mention marijuana. So I'm wondering about ventilation systems, even standalone. I remember one time I was working at the Smith Center and walked in next to Willie Nelson's trailer and was high for the rest of the day. Not joking. So I'm just wondering how we address those sorts of issues.
Mr. Rutledge?
Scott Rutledge, for the record, through you, Madam Vice Chair, to Assemblywoman Bilbray-Axelrod.
Feel free to go directly to the member.
Thank you, Vice Chair Nguyen. Assemblywoman Bilbray-Axelrod, I would say that a big part of the CCB's role in the regulation of these businesses is going to be, again, looking at that issue of indoor air quality, air movement. We know it's possible to create a better indoor air environment through air movement. And I think that, in addition to the filtration systems that exist today, it's definitely something that will be discussed and implemented through the CCB regulations. I'd be happy to have someone from the CCB speak to this, but I can also tell you that we'd like to see, with these venues, some will absolutely include the smoking of cannabis. And the number may choose not to. They may say, look, we want to be an infused cannabis dining experience. We don't want to allow the people to smoke cannabis throughout the venue. Maybe there's a smoking area. I also, in speaking with a representative from Clark County yesterday, and in my past conversations with folks with the city of Las Vegas, I do not want to include anything. I don't think that we should include anything in this legislation that prohibits outdoor consumption. I think that we obviously want to maintain that non-visibility, so that it's not visible to the public that this consumption is taking place. But I imagine in a situation where you might have a rooftop or a patio area, that allowing that outdoor consumption can also be part of a business plan. But here's what I'll say is that these venues are designed for folks that are 21 years or older. Anybody that's choosing to visit these venues, they know and expect that cannabis is to be consumed and that, that cannabis smoke is going to be there. I definitely understand the need to protect the employees that are working in these facilities, and that's really the primary impetus behind those air ventilation systems. But I think we can answer a lot of these questions and address that through the regulatory process. I'll stop there.
Assemblywoman
If I may,
Belmar, do you have any? You know what? We have so many questions, Mr. Sage, that I'm going to have one person answer, and then we're going to get going. Otherwise, we will never finish up this morning. So, if we can go next to Assemblywoman Cohen.
Thank you, Vice Chair, and thank you for the presentation. So I want to ask about the social equity applicant portion. I understand that social equity in this field has to do a lot with criminalization or criminalization in previous years, but I'd always thought that it also included some financial aspects. And I know there was testimony about, oh, this is a good way to get into the field, but how do communities of lower income not just get into the field as far as having jobs, but as far as getting licenses? So yeah, that's kind of what I'm interested in and want to make sure and address.
Scott Rutledge for the record. Assemblywoman Cohen, that's a great question. Again, I'll point to the flexibility in the independent cannabis lounge license type. If you would like to open up a venue where, say, permissive use takes place, because you don't have the budget to, say, open up a venue that, again, is going to require inventory controls and all the other aspects of selling cannabis or touching the plant, we wanted to allow that flexibility. We also didn't want to set it up so that venue would only ever be what we might call a permissive use venue where product would be delivered to. But once a business is up and running and they have other revenue streams that they've designed in this business, right? That gets asked a lot. How are these businesses going to make money? What I would say is that for some of these businesses, the consumption of cannabis is secondary to the primary purpose. So if you can run a business that makes money, coffee shop or what have you, but then allow your guests to come in and consume, and then through the process of being a successful business, through those operational revenues, then use those dollars to expand your business model to the sale of cannabis, that's possible in this legislation. I also know that, as we're going through the regulatory process, there's been a discussion already with the CCB about the reduction or elimination of certain fees. There's also a question about the, initially with cannabis establishment licenses, there was this requirement of liquidity. And that is not expressly deleted in this legislation because we do believe any business that is going to apply, especially for a privileged license, will need some operational cash flow on the front end. But I don't think that we need to define that liquidity in the hundreds of thousands of dollars as we have in the past. In fact, I think that we can set that at a much lower level. But again, I think that's based on what we hope will be robust and very informative conversations around what we can actually do through the regulatory process to assist social equity applicants and beyond even financial means with expertise, et cetera. And then one other thing I'll say is we are still currently in conversations with other parties about the social equity component of this legislation. And I believe we will be back with additional language and amendment to further extrapolate on that.
Thank you, Vice Chair.
Thank you. Next up, we can go to Assemblywoman Kasama.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Can you help me have a realistic view of what this might look like in our down on the strip or in our communities? So could we have an open air? I guess if the casino allowed it on one of their rooftops, could we have an open air section cordoned off? Or in a convention hall, could we have an area cordoned off again or enclosed? If the establishment allowed it, could we have a section on the sidewalk on the strip that is cordoned off for this? Can you kind of give me a big picture of what this might look like to our communities?
Again, Scott Rutledge for the record. Assemblywoman Kasama. One, I'd like to say good morning to you, especially. I'm one of your constituents in District 2. I think there might be a little confusion in here. Number one, this is not meant for public consumption, right? This isn't meant to be something where you walk over into a corded area, right? That like the smoking section, if you will. These are businesses, brick and mortar, right? The intention is to go in there, have a cannabis experience that's curated both from this perspective of the sale to the education that takes place. In the case of an independent lounge where the product may be delivered, again, there's still a transaction, and those can be limited. Someone's bringing product in. Again, it's about talking to them about the product that they're bringing in and making sure it meets the restrictions or requirements for bringing that product into the venue. As far as something on the strip or in the gaming corridor, the bill explicitly prohibits these types of businesses from being located within 1,500 feet of an unrestricted gaming license. There is a provision to allow some of the existing retail stores that might find themselves within that buffer that have been in existence before that new setback was created in AB 533 in 2019, to allow them to have an attached retail venue. But an independent lounge would not be able to locate within that 1,500 feet. So this is part of the solution with tourism here is we do want to have venues that are located, around the corridor, near-ish, let's say, because obviously that 1,500-foot buffer does provide some restrictions, and will eliminate some locations that, while we might think from a common sense perspective are ideal in respect and honor to what the gaming industry has requested in this, we want to make sure that we protect what they're doing as well. So I see this as these are more of destinations versus a place that as you're walking down the street, it's like, oh, there's the smoking area. That's not the intention here. These are destinations. In addition, it's like you asked the question, maybe, well, how would a consumer know where to go? This will now allow retailers to, at the point of sale, inform these consumers, their customers, that more explicitly around our consumption laws in Nevada. You cannot consume this in your hotel room or on the casino floor or on a public sidewalk. You may consume this at a venue. If they don't have a venue attached to their retail location, they could provide information about other venues that are nearby. So the goal really is to now kind of flip the script a little bit, and instead of avoiding that conversation with our cannabis consumers, be able to educate them about where it is permissive.
Thank you. If we can go next to Assemblywoman Hanson.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, and good morning, everyone. My question is in regards to some of the discussion about infusing the products, the products into food, perhaps. And so I want to find out, have we established an impairment standard? Because my concern is, certainly that's a concern if we have standalone lounges or even adjacent to dispensaries. What is the impairment standard when they leave? So that how do we measure it? And then if it's in food, now does food enter the category of possibly impairing us when we leave an establishment and have to drive our cars?
Scott Rutledge for the record. I would like to thank you for the question, Assemblywoman Hanson. I would like to ask Mr. Sage to speak to this, but before doing so, I do want to make one point clear here. The education and training component that is going to be required for those agents that work within these businesses is probably going to far exceed what we currently have in the industry today, because we're actually monitoring consumption. And so, today a cannabis consumer buys a product at a retail store and they may have a conversation with a bud tender about what might happen. But as you'll probably hear Mr. Sage say here in a moment, it really depends on the individual, and there are a number of factors to consider. So if it's possible, Madam Vice Chair, I'd like to ask Mr. Sage to take the rest of this answer.
That's okay too. And I also am consulting with legal about liability. I don't believe we have Dram Shop Act for alcohol consumption. So I'm checking with them as well. Assemblywoman Hanson, for you.
Thank you both very much, Assemblywoman Hanson. It's an excellent question that you're bringing up here. One thing that we have continually been a part of is essentially having the ability. So when we have somebody reserve a seat or two, or however many they're booking out, we offer a ride share, and we have a partnership with Lyft where we can actually discount their ride to and from. We realize that this is a special case scenario. This is not going to apply to absolutely every establishment in which would do this, but to actually pinpoint a level of impairment would be only possible through the education of our staff. There's no possible way to create a standard within what somebody is considered impaired, because the individuality of how cannabis, specifically the psychoactive THC, affects everybody is so variable from person to person. And it could be somebody could get 100 milligrams and feel completely fine, while another person can have 10 milligrams and be completely floored. There is no standard in the industry in that way because of that specific issue that is consistently arisen in any of the research done through consumption. So I think that all of it boils down to the SOPs. All of it boils down to the education of the staff and the consumer. When you are essentially, when we're putting forward this consumption lounge, consumption areas, designated consumption restaurants or bars, etc., it really, like, there's only one way to actually monitor anything, and that's again going to come through with how our servers are interacting with the guests. If there is a guest who comes in inebriated, that's a cause for us in our personal business. One of our SOPs is if somebody comes in already inebriated, we just put in CBD to their meal. So that way they can still enjoy everything with the group that they're with and don't feel left out. However, we recognize that there is a cutoff limit in which if they were to continue to consume THC, alcohol acts as a catalyst for the metabolism of THC. Therefore, we would be doing ourselves and them a disservice by by offering them cannabis in an already, sort of sketchy situation. And then the last note on this would be for, what you said about our food. Are we having to worry about our food being infused and then if we can drive after a meal? The whole point is to have a educated consumer base and an educated serving staff and an educated staff, essentially, because you can't, everybody has free will. And of course, if they want to go to a bar and have a few beverages, it is within their right to already do that. And that it's only, the only time that the staff is liable is if they see that somebody is completely inebriated and they don't do anything to prevent it. So I would say that a lot of the situations in which we've already faced with bars and the current legislation within the alcohol industry would pass over into the cannabis industry in that way.
Thank you, Mr. Sage. And Assemblywoman Hanson, I did hear back from our legal staff, but I think I can actually go to Chair Yeager to kind of point out where it is within this amended language. Chair Yeager, do you think you can answer that, or would you like me to go to Brad? I see him pop up on the screen.
I think I can answer. Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Steve Yeager for the record. Just wanted to clarify in terms of how we treat liability with respect to people who are serving the products, operating the venues. We're looking to treat it exactly the same as we do with alcohol. So in the amendment that Mr. Rutledge went through, it's the very last 2 pages of the amendment. You'll see some green language there. And essentially what we did was take the existing statute that protects alcohol establishments and translate them to cannabis establishments. So, what that means essentially is it's up to the individual to be responsible. Of course, there is an educational component, and I would expect the CCB to have some regulations around education, informing the consumer about transportation options. But I think you can think of it much like we do with bars. We do have some level of expectation that consumers are going to be responsible adults. And, there have been a number of campaigns over the years for, designated drivers and give your keys away. So I think that would apply here, but there would not be a risk of liability on people owning and serving the products, much like we do with alcohol.
Thank you. I know you have a lot of questions. I have more, but I'll let you move on to others and if we have time later.
I have a bunch of people with follow-up, so I'll see if I can swing back around if we have time. Next, if we can go to Assemblyman Ornlicker.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I find the concept of consumption lounge very appealing, but I recall from the testimony from an expert on the cannabis event bill saying that one of the important reasons to support enabling cannabis events is that in other states, the cannabis lounge concept has not lived up to its promise and that it hasn't been appealing to consumers of cannabis. So I wonder if we could get some clarity on this different presentation about the value and benefits of consumption lounges.
Scott Rutledge for the record. Ornlicker, thank you for that question. I'm actually familiar with the presenter from that hearing on AB 322, Andrew Muir. He and I worked closely together back in 2019 on the City of Las Vegas ordinance for a social use venue license. And Andrew's correct. What they've done in other markets didn't work. I think, as I mentioned before, I'll tell you specifically where it was. I went to San Francisco and visited one of their social use venues, two of them, in fact, their lounges. You go into a retail store, you buy cannabis there, and then you have essentially what I consider like an airport smoking lounge to consume. Again, you're not allowed to take any food or beverages. You consume your cannabis and you leave. Most folks would rather buy that cannabis and go where they like to consume, whether it be home or the park or wherever. In Denver, they had a lot of challenges with the way that they drafted Proposition 300 and other attempts at cannabis consumption legislation in that state. I believe their new cannabis hospitality law is much improved. I'm hearing from my colleagues in the Colorado cannabis marketplace. They're very excited about what that is going to provide in terms of venues that people will actually want to attend. And look, I would say this. I know there's been some communication out there around, the idea of events that definitely are something that occur on a regular basis, and having regulated cannabis consumption events are definitely something that we support. We talked about even what that might look like in this legislation, and understanding there was another bill for that Assemblyman Miller was working on. We said, you know what, they're going to do that. We're going to focus on the lounges. I will say this. In theory, right, these venues, depending on what type of venue you create, let's say somebody wants to open up a venue that is for live music. Live entertainment is allowed in this bill, right? So now you have a live music venue where either cannabis can be purchased because you chose to sell it, or you could work with potentially one of these vendors where they would do the event inside that venue. But the point is, we want flexibility in this licensing because the creativity that is out there, the things that I've been hearing from various entrepreneurs over the last 3 years, I know Chairman Yeager referenced it in his opening statement. It truly is incredible. And if there's ever been community, and again, I'm going to be a little Southern Nevada centric here and say that, Las Vegas has demonstrated time and time again that they're willing to take risks and do interesting things. And we have the world watching us. So I would say this, I would like to see this bill done in such a way that other states, other markets take what we do here, take our exacting standards and regulation, but also look at the entrepreneurial spirit that will happen around this industry and then mimic what we do here. So yes, it is correct. Other places have tried to do lounges, venues, has not been successful. We think that Chairman Yeager's bill, designed as such, will allow for it'll change that conversation around what these lounges can be.
Thank you, Mr. Rutledge. Again, I want to make sure I get to at least the first round of questions with people. If we can go next to Assemblywoman Hardy.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, for the question. So some of my questions were asked by Assemblywoman Hanson, but just a couple get a little more clarification about like the training with employees about single-use cannabis products, recognizing impairment or overconsumption and then how to handle a consumer how to recognize and then handle that. So I kind of am thinking in my mind, it's similar to like what people get with a TAM card. You have to get the education, then you get the card to show that you receive that training. So are there currently training programs already, or is that something the board would develop?
Scott Rutledge for the record. Thank you for the question, Assemblywoman Hardy. There are some programs that exist today. I imagine that through the CCB's process of promulgating these regulations, we may point to some of those specific Serve Smart programs. I think that something that could come out of this is actually an opportunity for entrepreneurs to develop those types of education and training programs based on the exacting regulations we expect from the CCB. So I do think that while we don't have that program here in Nevada, I know it has existed in a couple other markets, but I'd like to see a Nevada design program. I see Nicole Buffong shaking her head yes, because this is something that she and her organization have been working on nationally. So I think we should have a Nevada, created program that it will be based on the regulations that the CCB promulgated.
Thank you. Because that's a component I think is really important because, as we keep hearing, there's not a standard. And so it affects people differently. And so how do you recognize that, for maybe someone that hasn't been around it at all or very much? I think that's really essential to be able to recognize that in someone and then what to do about it. And then just one more question, if that's okay.
You know what, if I can, is it on the same line of the topic? I just want to make sure we have quite a few people, so okay. I want to try to get around the first round of people, if that's okay.
It's just a simple, I just wanted to clarify that, are they allowed to have alcohol served in the lounges?
Scott Rutledge, for the record, they are not. Currently a CCB regulation that does not allow alcohol to be included in any cannabis products or served. And so because this is a cannabis establishment license, you cannot mix those licenses. This was discussed somewhat in 2019 when the city of Las Vegas was looking to do their ordinance, because these were not going to be regulated by the state and therefore not cannabis establishment licenses. It would have allowed for that flexibility. But because these will be licensed by the CCB, no alcohol is allowed to be served, consumed, or on premise at these venues.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was a quick question. It was a longer answer, but I'm glad that we got that on the record. I think some other people had that question too. If we can go next to Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong.
Thank you, Madam Chair Wynn and Vice Chair Wynn and Chair Yeager. A very interesting topic. My question is going back to what was alluded to by Assemblywoman Cohen, and that is the social equity. I would like us to have legislation that is not aspirational, but is intentional to heal and fix the wrongs that have happened in the past. And I am just very unclear from your presentation how permissive use venues are going to be able to allow a owner to earn enough capital to be able to get a full license. And my understanding is those licenses are $1 million or more in cost. And so you're very unclear on how that is going to be accomplished. And that very much so concerns me. Can you speak to that?
And Scott Rutledge, for the record, Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong, thank you for that question. Number one, I'll address the last part first. There is no cost for these licenses established yet. That'll be established by the CCB. We are setting forth in this legislation to provide a reduced fee for this license type. Secondly, in terms of the type of revenue that someone would like, the type of business that someone would like to open, again, to be very clear, an independent cannabis lounge can do the exact same things as a retail cannabis lounge. The difference we are providing for with an independent cannabis lounge is that if you are a social equity applicant and your access to capital is limited, you'd like to place a marker in this business, in this industry, and open up a lounge that, while you may not initially choose to sell cannabis, because again, the costs related to that are so high, and that's outside of licensing, that's just the cost of doing the business, that then you would be able to open up your business where you would have other revenue streams. Again, these can be restaurants, they could be a comedy club. Really, it's up to the individual business plan. Once they're operational and maybe they're charging a cover fee or doing some other way to also add a revenue stream for that business. Again, this is the idea that you're working with an applicant who does not have the access to capital to do the whole thing initially, but through the operation of a venue that now has become known, not just here in the community, but potentially nationally as a cannabis lounge in Southern Nevada or Northern Nevada or where have you, that people want to attend, and they understand that in that venue that the cannabis is delivered or that they bring it with them, but they're spending money otherwise. Now all of a sudden they've developed a core business, and at which point they could use operational revenues to go after that license. But again, nothing prohibits that business owner from starting from applying to the CCB for the ability to sell cannabis at that independent cannabis lounge. So we're hoping that through the reduction in fees, and again, we still need to look at some additional language around social equity applicants and how do we further not just provide for those reductions in fees, but we truly incentivize those applicants to be part of this industry. It's a work in progress for sure, but I know that we can get there.
Madam Chair, just a quick follow-up if I may. Same line.
Make it quick. I know that we have some other people that would like to ask questions, but thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Has there been any discussion about setting aside some of the fees that are paid from the licensed, the existing full licensed cannabis dispensaries to go into some type of a fund to help these social equity applicants to be able to start their businesses and to be able to sell from the gate? Because again, your model for no sale or bring in does not appear to be an intentional model. It seems aspirational and to me destined to fail. Thank you.
Again, Scott Rutledge for the record. To your question, Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong. Again, I'll say that any independent cannabis lounge has the ability to sell from day one. The idea of allowing that flexibility, again, comes down to having the resources to provide for all of those additional costs as it relates to touching the plant. As far as a fund, yeah, there have been discussions, certainly. We would need to make some changes to how, for example, marijuana or cannabis tax revenue is distributed. I know it's one of the chamber's goals to see an equity fund created. And we have had conversations, including with Chairman Yeager about this and others. If it's something that this body would like to see happen, we can certainly have that conversation, whether it be part of this legislation or more broadly. Perhaps we ask the CCB to look at that. I do think that if it's not going to happen this session, then through the CCB and their workshops and with the new advisory panel that has been created, that this conversation about creating a fund like that to assist these social equity applicants get into this industry, I think it would receive broad support, certainly from my client and the other presenters that have helped present this bill today. But as far as in this bill, I would say it's not aspirational as an independent lounge to begin selling cannabis. You have the ability to do that from the jump. It's just a question of whether you choose to do that or not. And again, it was just a matter of adding some flexibility for those applicants.
Thank you, Mr. Rutledge. I have one more person here. We have Assemblyman O'Neill.
Thank you, Vice Chair, for allowing me the time. Mr. Rutledge, here in Carson City, we've had some problems with a company opening up and conducting business, the neighbors from several hundred yards away complaining about the odors from their business that they were conducting. And I'm talking several, probably quarter mile or better. So my question is, in these other places where they've established these cannabis usage lounges, you talked about how they would try to protect their employees from being high. But how do you go about cleaning the air into your HVAC to your exhaust system so the neighborhoods are not infused with the secondhand smoke in a practical way, not hypothetically that it's going to be regulated, but tell me what usage, how did they actually do that?
Scott Rutledge for the record. Thank you for the question, Assemblyman O'Neill. Sorry, thank you. Assemblyman O'Neill, I would first say that there's a lot of discussion, of course, around secondhand cannabis smoke and the effects it can have on individuals. So obviously at the point of consumption is the primary concern. We need to make sure that we're ventilating those venues. As far as eliminating what we might consider more of a nuisance odor, I don't know that it's been proven that it's a hazard, but it certainly can be a nuisance, the smell itself. There are ventilation systems being used right now by cannabis businesses to address ambient cannabis odor at cultivation sites, et cetera, where cannabis exists in very large quantities. When you think of a retail store and the amount of inventory that's packaged, it's not openly airing out or in the process of growing or being cured, right? The ambient odor that takes place around cannabis during, like, say, a cultivation is a lot different than the ambient smell of cannabis when it's in a retail store. Now, obviously, we're adding to that consumption, the smoking of cannabis. And again, that smell, I think we've all smelt it. Again, we smell it on our public sidewalks. We smell it in the hotels. We smell it everywhere. And so what I would say is that in the local ordinances, as they address nuisance odors as well, this is something that you know, in their ordinances, they could address this issue of nuisance odor, right? And I actually had a conversation with somebody from Clark County yesterday about this very issue. So I think it's something that it can be done. If you don't allow outdoor consumption at a local level, that certainly is one way to address it. But I also think that it's finding the balance between, do we want folks to consume this indoors? Do we want to allow it outdoors? These are, again, conversations that I think should take place both through the regulatory process and at the local level.
Thank you, Mr. Rutledge. At this time, I am going to begin testimony in support, opposition, and neutral. I know that we do have the Cannabis Compliance Board. We have the executive director that is on the Zoom. And so I will, if we can do it, I know we have floor coming up. If we can, I will allow for some additional questions after hearing some of that testimony. So if I can just make sure that some of those people, in particular from the Cannabis Compliance Board, kind of stay on the line to answer any potential questions that we have after that. So at this time, I will begin testimony in support of Assembly Bill 341. Chair Yeager, do we have anyone other than the people that had presented as a part of the bill on the line to testify in support?
I'm not aware of anybody else, Madam Vice Chair.
If you are, I would ask you to unmute and turn on your camera at this time, but I don't see anyone additional. So broadcast services, if we can go to the phone line, I remind callers to please clearly state your name for the record, and please limit your testimony to 2 minutes.
Madam Vice Chair, we are experiencing just a little, this is broadcast. We are experiencing technical difficulties, but it will be just one moment until we get it fixed. If you can just be patient with us for a moment, please.
No problem.
Madam Vice Chair, I believe
Thank you, Madam
we're all
Vice
set to
Chair.
go.
We're
Very
calling a
popular.
person to provide testimony in support of Assembly Bill 341. Please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. We will begin with caller with the last 3 digits of 520. Caller, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
For the record, my name is Brianna Padilla, Brianna I serve as the Communications Director for the Chamber of Cannabis, and I'm submitting my support for AB 341 as I believe it is a crucial first step in decriminalizing the adult use of legal weed. With the legalization of cannabis in 2017, we created a huge gap that left our tourists and non-land owning residents essentially criminalized for the consumption of a legal substance, one which many turn to for medical reasons. As a resident cannabis professional and community advocate who regularly engages with the public, I can tell you that a legal lounge type model is long overdue in our state. While it is only the first step in what will likely be a long process guided by the CCB and its committees, the proposed bill represents the most viable and actionable option for the establishment of these lounge licenses, while acknowledging that policy does not exist in a vacuum. In the creation of these types of consumption lounge models, we are allowing for the development of a new, more accessible model of cannabis license while addressing the concerns of stakeholders and community members alike. I see possibility and potential for this bill and others like it to improve access to my community through the creation of licenses with different and more accessible thresholds of ownership. While any kind of cannabis lounge is and should be considered a privileged license, we must ensure that the privilege is not only extended to the wealthy, the white, and the propertied. We must give community members, especially those harmed by the war on drugs, the opportunity to establish themselves, provide them a fair opportunity to compete in an industry rife with inequity, and establish their businesses with a flexible and realistic path for growth. While there are still amendments to be made to this bill, I believe AB 341 is a crucial and necessary first step towards this future. With our state still reeling from the impact of the pandemic and facing an inevitable influx of visitors, the time to create these licenses is now. And in closing, I'd like to thank the committee, Vice Chair, and Chairman Yeager for their time, hard work, and dedication to this bill and for hearing me speak. Thank you.
Thank you. Broadcast Services, can we go to the next caller in support?
Yes, for caller with the last 3 digits of 412. Caller, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin. Caller with the last 3 digits of 412, please press *6 to unmute yourself and begin your testimony.
Good morning. Thank you for providing me with this opportunity. My name is Mark Cohn. I'm a resident of Las Vegas and a co-founder and CEO of Bud Place HQF and Bud's Place Franchising LLC. Both companies are headquartered in Las Vegas, and Bud's Place Franchising is a franchisor of social cannabis consumption lounges and the only cannabis-related franchisor that's been permitted to join the International Franchise Association. We would like to start by thanking Chairman Yeager for putting together a very complete and well-conceived bill related to consumption lounges. He recognized many of the potential issues and complexities of our business while addressing the reasons why these types of establishments are needed by both the residents of Nevada and the tourists that we try to attract from other states and other countries. The bill recognizes that Nevada needs consumption lounges as a safe place for residents and tourists to consume cannabis away from the casinos and the hotels. Knowing there's a safe place to consume will increase cannabis sales in our dispensaries and create destinations for the tourists and the locals here. As written, the bill offers flexibility of business plans and opportunities for social equity. However, we'd like to bring up some concerns we have regarding specifically Section 22, discussing the regulations including and about sealed containers of cannabis being brought into the establishment and a greeter or employee trying to enforce those rules. We understand and agree with all of the basic concepts and intentions of this section: reduced impact of the black market, adherence to possession rules, and to delineate the air safety needs as well. And by the way, we're proud to say that our business model goes above and beyond the air quality standards noted in the bill. Here are some possible concerns about the implementation of the section as it's written. Searching the customers at the door.
Sure.
Yes. Yes.
You're at your 2 minutes, and also if you have concerns with the bill as presented, including the amendment, then it will have to be opposition testimony. So do you support the bill as it is
yes,
presented?
Yes, we do support the bill as it is because there's nothing else. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. And I'm going to go ahead and go to the next caller just to make sure we have an opportunity to hear everyone. But thank you for your testimony. Broadcast Services, if we can go to the next caller.
Next caller with the last three digits of 595. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning, Chair and committee members. For the record, my name is Teddy Retta, TEDDYRETTA, and I am the Policy Director for CEIC. CEIC is in support of AB 341, and we would like to thank Assemblyman Yeager for bringing this bill forward. Equity in the cannabis industry has been a long time coming. We believe that this piece of legislation takes an important step to ensuring that Black and Brown communities have the same access to safely consume cannabis and to own cannabis consumption lounges. We look forward to continuing to work with the bill sponsors of AB 341. Thank you for consideration of this bill.
Thank you. If we can go to our next caller in support.
Caller with the last three digits of 467. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning, Vice Chair Wynn and committee members. My name is Danny Baranowski, DANIBARANOWSKI. I am Vice President of the Chamber of Cannabis as well as a sales manager for 2 Nevada cannabis brands, and I am here to testify in support of AB 341. First, I want to thank Chairman Yeager for sponsoring the legislation. He has encouraged us to get involved and has been open to our ideas and concepts for legislation. We have enjoyed working with him over the past year, and we are proud to be here to support him in this effort. In 2010, I was charged with a cannabis felony. It was a difficult time, as I'm sure it is for so many others who have been criminalized by the failed policies of the cannabis prohibition. But I have also had the privilege and opportunity to have my record expunged, which has allowed me to pursue a career in the cannabis industry. I truly consider myself lucky to have found a career in cannabis. It has become my passion and my purpose. My group of friends in Vegas are some of the best women I know. They are mothers, business leaders, entrepreneurs, athletes, community volunteers, and of course, civically minded. And we all have one thing in common. We choose to consume cannabis because we enjoy the way it makes us feel. It is our intoxicant of choice, but without any venues or spaces to legally consume, we put ourselves at risk to be penalized when we decide to get together in a public place and consume. We don't do this in protest or because we get some thrill from breaking the law. We simply believe it's more fun and enjoyable when we consume socially together. We see the bigger picture ahead of Nevada by allowing consumption lounges, and we know that if we are often thinking about the opportunities that await us, well, we can't be the only ones. Nevada has undergone a painful year, and this bill would allow for revitalization of small businesses, spurring on our economic recovery and provide new opportunities for Nevadans. These new licenses will allow more women entrepreneurs the opportunity to participate in the emerging cannabis market, hopefully providing some much-needed feminization, style, and sophistication to what has become an overwhelmingly male-centric marketplace. And that's going to be good for Nevada's cannabis industry, as roughly half of cannabis consumers are women. I would like to once again thank Chairman Yeager for sponsoring AB 341, and I would like to thank Vice Chair Wynn and the committee members for the opportunity to testify today. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I go to the next caller in support?
Next caller with the last three digits of 740. Caller, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hi, my name is Katrina Saunders. Thank you, Chairman Yeager and the committee for letting me speak today. I have been disenfranchised by the war on drugs systemically, not only at a federal level, but also a state level. Back in 2011, 2011, I got indicted under Operation Chronic Problem. I was set up by an undercover DEA officer who posed as a sick patient when I worked at Nevada Compassionate Care. A few months prior, I had the opportunity to meet President Obama at a healthcare reform rally where he said he was not prosecuting medical cannabis patients. A few months later, I got prosecuted for a very, very small amount. I ended up getting probation and a $100 fine because we did not want to snitch on any of the 800 patients that we had just signed up on Nevada's medical cannabis program because there was no laws for distribution or consumption at that time. I said that to say this. A pathway to ownership also should include dispensaries, cultivations, and lounges. When I reached out to Tick Sagerbloom in regards to speak on this subject, he told me that Nevada State Legislature was responsible and they're the ones who made the law to exclude felons from working in the industry. So after I got out of prison and helped build an industry and made over $100 million and my wrist now pops out of place, I am disbarred from working in the industry due to my felony. I think that this bill would help open up a pathway to ownership for people who have been disenfranchised by the war on drugs, but also needs to be addressed real ownership like they're doing in other states. As far as cultivations, labs, dispensaries, we should not have to
just at 2 minutes. If I can have you go ahead and wrap up.
I can definitely send all this testimony in.
Perfect.
Definitely. Tick Sagerbloom said it's called capitalism. Dispensary licenses are given out by legislature and the governor. They don't worry about who deserves them. And he told me that I was a nobody because I didn't have Black Lives Matter behind me or NAACP.
You know what? I'm going to have to ask you to submit the remainder of your comments in writing. And Broadcast Services, if we can go to the next caller in support.
If you have recently joined the call and would like to testify in support of Assembly Bill 341, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. We will go with caller with the last 3 digits of 200. Caller, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
This is Chris Anderson, ChrisAnderson, representing the Apothecary Shop Dispensary at 4240 West Flamingo Road in Las Vegas. I appreciate the participation of everyone on this issue. And I'm glad that we were able to be intimately involved in the drafting of this legislation. I support it as amended in Chairman Yeager's most recent amendment. This is a balanced, careful approach to implementing a safe place for folks to use cannabis in Nevada. It's going to be a long process. The Cannabis Compliance Board is going to go through a lot of careful consideration in the regulatory process. Local governments will then, have their input in terms of how to zone and allow these licensees to move forward. So I just think this is a very measured and careful approach to allowing cannabis consumption lounges, which we obviously desperately need because there are a lot of folks who have really no place to consume cannabis in Nevada at the moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony in support. We can go to our next caller in support.
Madam Vice Chair, there are no further callers at this time.
If we can go next to any callers in opposition of Assembly Bill 341. And I will remind callers to please clearly state and spell your name for the record, as well as limit your testimony to 2 minutes. Again, with the callers that were previously in support, as well as those that are in neutral and opposition, your written comments are more than welcome. If you are not able to convey your either support, opposition, or neutral testimony within that 2-minute time period, we would definitely encourage you to do that within 24 hours of today's meeting if you haven't done so already. So with that, I will go to callers in opposition of Assembly Bill 341. Broadcast Services?
Thank you. For callers wishing to provide testimony in opposition of Assembly Bill 341, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. We will begin with caller with the last 3 digits of 119. Caller, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin. Caller with the last 3 digits of 119, please go ahead.
Greatest Assembly. I'm sorry, Greatest Chair. My name is Timothy Eliado, representing Anansi Enterprise, and I am speaking in opposition, primarily because this bill does not include any pathway to ownership for minority as what the social equity basically standard is supposed to, and I think this is something that should not be used under the guise of social equity. I think everything that has been amended in this bill is intended for what this bill is intended for, and I don't think that we should put it under the umbrella of social equity. So real social equity means for people like me who basically has contributed to this industry, meaning we are breeders. All these brands that you have in these stores were at one point genetics, and these genetics were worked on by people like myself. People like myself were basically cast out of the industry. And to say that all these licensee or MME holders basically did not, in terms of Mr. Rutledge's comments, that this bill to bear in mind that it's to help the social equity applicants that cannot raise capital. But the point is this, that each and every licensee at this point too had to raise money to be able to establish the business that they have right now, and we should be given the same equal opportunity. And I think that this is a very disgraceful act, and we should have a sit down. This is something that is being passed without the notice of the community, because I know the community will not stand behind this. Just like it's for and also with NRS 453A, the reasons I wasn't able to basically we were not able to sell. Remember that. Let's not forget that.
Can I go ahead and get you? You're right at 2 minutes. If I can get you to wrap up again, I would encourage you to put any of your opposition testimony in writing and submit it. So can I get you to wrap up?
Thank you. Yes, I would like to wrap up. Is this please? We were not allowed to sell. Let's not forget that. We have no other choice but to take a Judiciary Act right now if this bill does not include real pathway to basically economic sustainability for us that basically help build this industry. Thank you.
Thank you. If we can go to our next caller in opposition.
If you have recently joined the call and would like to testify in opposition of Assembly Bill 341, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Madam Vice Chair, there are no further callers in opposition at this time.
Thank you. At this time, can we go to callers in neutral? And I believe we have some people on the Zoom. Mr. Klimas, are you on here in neutral or just available for questions?
Thank you, Vice Chair. Tyler Klimas for the record. Just here for any questions.
Okay. Thank you. If we can go to the callers in neutral of Assembly Bill 341. Again, I would remind you to clearly state your name for the record. And again, I would encourage anyone that I hate to cut people off, but if I cut you off, please make sure that you submit your comments in writing. I know that our committee members are diligent in reading those. So if we could go to callers in neutral.
Yes, thank you. For callers wishing to testify in neutral of Assembly Bill 341, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. We will begin with caller with the last three digits of 241. Caller, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin. Caller with the last three digits of 241, please press *6 now to begin your testimony.
Good morning, Vice Chair Nguyen and members of the Assembly Judiciary Committee. My name is Alex Ortiz, ALEX-ORTIZ. Today, on behalf of the Nevada Association of Counties, Washoe County, and Clark County, collectively, we're all in neutral on Assembly Bill 341 as proposed to be amended. I want to thank the sponsor, Assemblyman Yeager and Scott Rutledge, for hearing our concerns and working to address them in a future amendment. I want to mention the importance of the local licensing and approval process for cannabis establishments, and that is included in this bill for consumption lounges. We look forward to continuing to work with the Assemblyman on this legislation. Thank you, Vice Chair and committee members.
Thank you. We can go to our next caller in neutral.
Caller with the last three digits of 938. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning, Chair and committee members. For the record, my name is Ariel Edwards, ARIELLEEDWARDS, calling on behalf of the City of North Las Vegas. We are in neutral, and we would like to thank Assemblyman Yeager for bringing AB 341 forward and working with us on the amendment language. We look forward to continued conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. We can go to our next caller in neutral.
Caller with the last three digits of 668. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
My name is Lake Martin, LAYKEMARTIN. Good morning, Chair Yeager, Vice Chair Nguyen, and members of the Judiciary Committee. I'm the Executive Director of the Nevada Dispensary Association, and we appreciate the opportunity to testify in neutral. We want to thank Chair Yeager, Scott Rutledge, and the Chamber of Cannabis for their work on developing this new license type, which will create opportunity and increase diversity in the cannabis industry. We are grateful for their continued willingness to work with the NDA as this concept and the bill have evolved. We also wanted to highlight that the bill's proponents have made clear that education and training of employees working in these new establishments is very important. And the NDA currently provides substantial educational programming in all areas of the cannabis industry, from compliance to record keeping, security, HR, employee onboarding, plant science, and so on. And the NDA can be a partner in developing training to educate employees in this new area. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have another caller in neutral?
Yes. Caller with the last three digits of 530. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Good morning, Chairman Yeager and members of the committee. My name is Teresa Hayes, TERESA, last name HAYES. I'm the Environmental Health Program Manager for the Food Program for the Nevada Division of Public and Behavioral Health. I am here to answer any questions you may have this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. If you want to go ahead and stay on the line, that would be fine too, just in case we need to go back. But do you have any other further testimony, or just here to provide any questions? Oh, sounds like we lost them. If we can go to the next caller in neutral.
Caller is still on the line. They muted themselves.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Do we have any other callers in neutral?
If you have recently joined the call and would like to testify in neutral, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. And Madam Vice Chair, the phone line is open and working. However, there are no further callers in neutral at this time.
Seeing that we have some additional time, there were quite a few poor people that were, I anticipated might be here to testify in neutral support and opposition. But based on that, I am going to open this back up for some more questions to see if we do. I know that I cut people off on their first round of questions, so I'm going to kind of go back around there. So if you could send me a Skype message if you would like to ask a follow-up question or a secondary question, that would be wonderful. So I'm just going to take a second break here so I can take a look at my messages. That works. Okay, if we can go back to, I'm going to kind of start like I did from the beginning. Can we go back to Assemblywoman Kasama?
Thank you so much, Vice Chair. So my question has to do with the social equity applicant and defining that. And I see here that the board is going to be set up and they're going to establish guidelines for what a social equity applicant is. But is there some idea what that will look like? Because it says people that have been harmed by the cannabis drug laws. So could that be somebody that's had a felon or a misdemeanor with cannabis possession, but would it exclude somebody that has a felon or misdemeanor with cannabis that maybe had another crime attached, along with that, a burglary or assault, or is there some idea how that might look, or what people are thinking of for that?
This is Steve Yeager for the record. Assemblywoman Kasama, there will still be excluders. There are already excluders in the law for certain types of felony convictions to get into this industry. And I don't have that at the tip of my fingers, but I will get that for you. And, I think it might be worthwhile if he's willing to have Executive Director Klimas maybe just talk. He's not really here in any position, but maybe just talk about how he would envision the CCB process of coming up with, adding some more detail to the language that we have in the bill, with the caveat that we're still working on some of that language. But Madam Vice Chair, if you would allow that, I think that would be helpful for the committee.
Mr. Klimas, go ahead.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Thank you, Tyler Klimas, for the record, and Assemblywoman and Chair Yeager. Thank you for the question as well. And so, I guess I would say this. Social equity, inclusion, diversity is laid out in the public policy that created the Cannabis Compliance Board in AB 533. So this is kind of already part of our charge as the board always was going to be. And the role of the advisory commission, which is the 12-member commission that makes recommendations to the board, will be to study this. I've put on the record previously that one of the first actions when the commission begins to meet, likely in June or July later this year, is going to be to create a subcommittee on diversity, equity, and inclusion. What that's going to do is bring in the kind of right voices to discuss these issues and make recommendations around not only if this bill was to pass, what would define a social equity applicant, but really what is the social equity direction that the CCB and the state needs to take to ensure that we are focusing on diversity and inclusion. So I guess what I would say is this is part of a larger goal and charge that the Cannabis Compliance Board is moving forward with anyway. And part of that will be, if this bill goes forward, to define what we need to define as part of this legislation.
Follow up, Chair, Vice Chair.
Go ahead, Assemblywoman Kasama.
So I understand that, the building of the guidelines, but mine was more a question of criminal convictions in the past, and I'm sure maybe I need to look at AB 533, but how that, if it's just criminal convictions in the past that are strictly like possession of drugs, or if there's criminal possession or criminal activity with drugs, but other things associated with, would that be excluded, or do you have an idea about that?
Sure, Assemblywoman Tyler Klimas again for the record. Thank you. So currently there are exclusions. That's a Class A felony, which is listed in statute, and then or two or more felonies or two felonies are excluded. But that is something although listed in statute now, that is something that personally with the CCB, our advisory commission was going to study that if there are any changes that may need to be recommended out of that, those are something that we'll be looking at regardless of if this bill passes or not.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, if we can go to Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong.
Thank you, Chair Wynn, Vice Chair Wynn. I think this question it might be for Mr. Klimas. Is there any discussion being had as to whether of how the limits on licenses for lounges for current dispensary owners? Because my concern is if you're trying to allow this new category of lounge license and every dispensary got one, then that's going to limit who could come into the market as a lounge licensee. That would then go into proximity, how many feet apart they could be, whether or not the municipality is going to allow so many in their communities. So I'm kind of concerned about that too, because quite frankly, they would have the advantage both financially and because they are already existing and because they had the benefit and the advantage when they received their initial licenses for the dispensary. So that's concerning when we're talking about social justice and equity. Is that even going to allow space for these smaller people to come in if the dispensaries already have a foothold?
Assemblywoman Tyler Klimas for the record, and thank you for that. And as you know, the CCB shares all of your concerns on equity, diversity, and inclusion in the industry. But, as far as I'd probably defer to the bill sponsors of what they envision, I believe they had mentioned something early on in this amendment about, a limit on the number of lounges that an owner already in could have. But again, I guess I would defer to their vision and how they see this. But of course, sharing your concerns on all fronts.
Thank you, Mr. Klimas. Madam Vice Chair, maybe I should have directed just to the bill sponsor, and I apologize. Chair Yeager, I probably should just ask you. So if you wouldn't mind, I'd appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you, Steve Yeager. Steve Yeager, for the record, I've got to send that over to Mr. Rutledge, who I think has the provision you're speaking about right there in front of him.
Scott Rutledge for the record. Section 12, we amended into the bill, subsection 4. The board shall not issue more than one cannabis consumption lounge license in the same county to an ownership group, individual, or an individual with an ownership stake in a group. And the idea was if you do have there are 5 dispensaries that you own, you're not going to open up 5 lounges. You're going to pick one of those locations to co-locate your lounge. The same would apply on the independent side, that someone couldn't come in and open up 8 or 9 lounges. They can only open up 1. We definitely want to continue to work on this. I had a conversation with the ACLU this week, and certainly there are others that I'm communicating with about how we might address this, both further in statute. Obviously, we know the CCB, where they stand, what their directive is, and then also how this would impact local ordinances. While certainly we appreciate the neutral testimony from Mr. Ortiz earlier, we do want to ensure that local ordinances represent the spirit and intent of what we're trying to accomplish here in terms of allowing for these licenses to be given and spread out, not just to retailers or those with the necessary resources today, but how we allow for social equity applicants to get into this industry.
And then let's see, I think I'm going to go next to Assemblywoman Hanson.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, for a second chance. Kind of following up on my colleague, Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong. With the standalone lounges, we know that with the dispensary, that the licensing is exorbitantly high, the fees, the price, and that the process was flawed. I know there's changes being made, and And I know that's been a big job for you to tackle, Mr. Klimas, and appreciate your work. So with the standalones, do we have any indication how, going to this equity issue, are people going to be driven out of that market because the licensing fees are so high? And then I have another question unrelated.
Assemblywoman, Tyler Klimas for the record, was that directed at me? I apologize.
Well, whoever would be familiar, I'm thinking maybe you, on the licensing side, how expensive it is to get the dispensary. How do we have any indication how expensive it's going to be for standalone consumption lounges?
Sure, and thank you, Assemblywoman, for the question. Tyler Klimas for the record, and I again, the bill sponsors can jump in here. I believe what this envisions, well, it allows for the board to promulgate the regulations around the fee. So it allows the board to set whatever fee that the board feels is adequate for this kind of license type, either or, whether it be this adjacent model or a independent. However, I believe the bill also allows for, if not directs the board to consider reduced fees for what would be a potential social equity applicant once that is defined as well. So not determined as we sit here today, as from what I can tell with the bill, but something that the board would consider and set at a future date.
Okay, thank you for that. And then just lastly, my other colleague, Mr. Assemblyman Ornlickler, brought up that, perhaps these lounges haven't been completely, very a big demand or successful. I'm just curious, is this more business driven that the market is being, we're approaching this because there's a lot of business opportunity, but there's not necessarily the consumer. I didn't hear a lot of that on the testimony. It seemed like a lot of business was interested, but didn't hear a lot of testimony on the consumer about lounges.
Scott, for the record, if possible, I'd like to direct this John Hudak, if he's still available. I know that he had some thoughts on consumer demand. John, are you still available? Is that possible, Vice Chair Wynn?
Yeah, no, that's fine. I see him there. Just remember to say your name for the record before you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Wynn. John Hudak for the record. It's an excellent question. We have a situation in which we have had past states go down this road with little success because either market demand wasn't there, or more likely, the establishments were not meeting market demand in the places where they were desired. What we know about Nevada in particular is that there are enormous groups of individuals who can be disenfranchised from the use of cannabis, the use of legal cannabis, because of their housing situation. Now, that exists in other areas as well. In other parts of the country, there may be more or less permissiveness about the use of cannabis in domiciles that maybe are not owned, or there is a greater willingness of individuals to just skirt the rules. What's unique about Nevada, and one of the reasons why I began working on this issue of social consumption lounges in the state in particular, is that the significant tourist base in the state lends itself to these types of lounges for two reasons. First, we know that there are firm rules in place in Nevada, like in other states, about the use of cannabis products that are non-edibles in hotel rooms, in public, in casinos, and elsewhere. And that obviously creates challenges for tourists seeking to use the substance in a legal way. At the same time, in a very basic way, we know it's true in Southern Nevada, we know it's true in Northern Nevada as well, is that visitors to the state come to the state to engage in activities that they perhaps do not engage in elsewhere at home or in other states. And so by setting up these types of lounges, it can funnel a tourism demand into them in a fairly unique way that really isn't necessarily present in other tourism markets around the country. And so I think the concerns about what has happened in other states are legitimate concerns, but I think the tourism model in particular for the state of Nevada adds to what is an existing resident base demand for these types of establishments in the state.
Thank you. I won't take any more time, Chair. I still have more, but we can let others have a turn.
I would encourage you. I know that this is a topic that there are lots of, it's complex. Obviously, we started hearing some of this discussion last session, so I would encourage you to reach out to the bill sponsor to answer any further questions that you might have. With that, I will go next to Assemblyman O'Neill.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Hopefully it's a quick question, quick answer. To Chair Yeager, you may be best at this. I just want to make sure that this bill, legislation, if approved, it still gives the local government, city, counties, the authority to deny or such businesses.
Steve Yeager, for the record, you are correct. Local government would have a play in this. They would have to approve the zoning location of the place. So if, simply stated, if you don't want consumption spaces in your area, then the governing board or commission would be allowed to say no.
Thank you. Thank you, Vice Chair.
Okay, this is the last call for questions. I'm looking around the Zoom here. Last time to get into the weeds on this. Okay, with that, getting my mom jokes in. So with that, I will turn this back over to Chair Yeager for any kind of following remarks. I don't know if your other co-presenters have any brief remarks too, but I will turn it over to you to direct their closing.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Steve Yeager, for the record. My only regret is that we did not have a joint hearing with the Senate Judiciary Committee this morning. But Madam Vice Chair, if you would allow, I'd like to go to Mr. Rutledge, I think, to make some concluding remarks, and then I think I'll bring us home because I know the hour is late and we have to get to floor as well. So, Mr. Rutledge.
Thank you, Chairman Yeager. Thanks again to Vice Chair Nguyen and the committee. We certainly appreciate the time and opportunity to present what we think is a critical piece of public policy for the state of Nevada. Has been stated before and stated today, our policy of where may I consume this cannabis I purchased legally, and the answer being not here. Well, what about there? Well, not there either. That's not going to work anymore. We wanted to be thoughtful and also allow for more opportunity with this type of licensing. We admit we have not gotten exactly where we'd like to be yet with the language in the bill. We certainly understand that the CCB has a directive. And again, we're trying to focus as much of the real details of this legislation to the regulatory process. But I do understand some of the concerns that have been raised today around social equity applicants. And I just want the committee to know we are still working on that and hope to strengthen that part of the bill. And again, I just want to point out that I hope you saw that with some of the presenters today on this bill, the Chamber of Cannabis represents a very diverse group of individuals and companies that work in the cannabis industry in Nevada. When they asked me to advise them in this process, I was more than happy to start off in that role. And of course, we're happy to be representing them here at the legislature. But I've been so impressed with the ideas, their passion, and their commitment to a number of leading ideas in what we should be doing with this legislation. So I wanted to say thanks again to Tina Ullman and Nicole Buffong and Christina Thomas for being here today and the other presenters. And again, to thank Chairman Yeager for allowing us to participate in this presentation today.
And thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Thank you, committee members. And I likewise want to thank those who joined us on the Zoom today. I think I was pretty vocal that I was fairly disappointed last session that we weren't able to figure this issue out. There were a lot of reasons we weren't able to do that. But here we are 2 years later. And I just can't say thank you enough to those that you heard from, including Mr. Rutledge, because we began talking about this issue, years ago, and over the interim, I had a lot of people approach me and say, can we do consumption lounges? And I had one question for those folks, and that was, well, how do we do it? What does it look like? I need ideas, because as you've heard today, this is a pretty tricky issue. There's a lot of different competing interests at play. And I will tell you that many of the people who reached out to me said, yes, I have some ideas. I'll get those to you. And I never got anything until the Chamber of Cannabis and Mr. Rutledge pledged to help. And that's exactly what you see in front of you. And Mr. Rutledge, I know, has been working legislator like ours in the past few months to get this bill ready. And I know that because I've had conversations and email exchanges with them well into the night. So there's still work to be done here, but I think we are heading in the right direction, and I have full confidence that we can get this right. Obviously, we have a deadline that's out there a week from today, but no matter what happens with that deadline, we're going to continue working on this bill. And I would just encourage any of you here today, if you've heard something that doesn't sound right, if you have suggestions, if you have additional questions, I'll make myself available. Mr. Rutledge is probably more available than he should be, but he'll be happy to answer those questions as well. And I just thank you for your consideration. And I think the time is now for us to do this and to do it right. So I would ask for your support for Assembly Bill 341.
Thank you, Chair Yeager, and thank you to all of our presenters for your patience and your expertise and your involvement in this very complicated topic. And at this time, I will close the hearing on Assembly Bill 341, and I will turn this imaginary gavel back to Chair Yeager to close out our meeting.
Thank you so much, Madam Vice Chair, for helping us get through that committee. That's the only bill on our agenda, but we do have one other item, which is public comment. By way of reminder, we reserve up to 30 minutes for public comment at the end of each meeting. Callers on the public comment line will have 2 minutes to provide public comment. Public comment is a time to raise matters of a general nature within the jurisdiction of the Assembly Judiciary Committee. BPS, could we go to our phone lines to see if there's anybody there who'd like to give public comment this morning?
Thank you, Chair. For callers wishing to provide public comment, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. We will begin with caller with the last 3 digits of 556. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Anne Marie Grant, ANNEMARIE-GRANT. My brother Thomas Purdy was killed by Reno Police and Washoe County Sheriff's Office, asphyxiated to death during a mental health crisis. The family of Las Vegas Metropolitan Police homicide victim Joseph Michael Justin is demanding the immediate resignation of Captain Nicole Splinter, the immediate termination of former LVMPD officer Timothy Nicode's medical retirement, and the immediate return of Joseph Justin's belongings to his family. On August 22nd, 2017, Joseph Justin was identified as a burglary suspect and apprehended by Officer Splinter and Nicode's. Within 45 seconds, Justin was gunned down. Witnesses on scene stated they never saw Justin with a firearm in his hand. Splinter, who shot first, claimed she saw Justin hold a pistol to his temple and then point the gun at her, prompting her to shoot. Nicode's followed her and fired. Justin was shot in the leg and the back and died from his wounds. Splinter is currently captain and the Bureau Commander of the Office of Internal Oversight and Constitutional Policing, which oversees internal investigations of police homicides. We believe police should not be able to investigate themselves, but since they do, investigations shouldn't be led by someone who has already taken someone from the community. As taxpayers, we pay for officers' pensions. In the spirit of fairness and integrity, we do not believe we should have to pay for the pensions of officers who commit crimes. LVMPD has had 13 years to return Justin's belongings to his family, yet all they have received is an ID card. The family is demanding the immediate return of his belongings so they can have some closure and continued healing. Please support bills that promote transparency and accountability. Have a nice weekend. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment, Ms. Grant. Have a nice weekend as well. BPS, are there any other callers on the public comment line?
Yes, Chair. Caller with the last 3 digits of 119. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Greetings, good morning. Good morning, Chair. My name for the record is Timothy Eliado, spelled TIMOTHYELIADDO, representing Non-C Enterprise. And on behalf of the, pretty much just wanted to make just another comment in terms of social equity. The main issue is the barriers. I had started as an applicant. Just wanted to include for the record that NRS 453A made it possible that we were not able to sell any cannabis to patients at that time, because this started off a medical establishment. And as a medical patient, and at that time, I also grew, and then the genetics that we provided for these for our friends and family and patients were these genetics that are currently right now in these shops. We saw, and then we built the MME licenses right from the very beginning. When they received their licenses, they had no idea what to do next. How do I establish? What kind of commercial buildings do I get? We literally built this from nothing. It was a trial and error, and then we worked on this. But unfortunately, we were marginalized from this because we did not have the capital. I saw my friends and partners, form MSOs in which they were able to establish capital to basically form their businesses. I was not able to even get my banking account. When after I was basically funded even by the U.S. Pain Foundation with my nonprofit organization, which was Cannabis Wellness at that time. So I have systematically watched our system grow from the very ashes from what it was as an idea, when we're just taking ballots, signatures to be placed on ballots. We work from that all the way up. And we're literally never even involved in any topic or communications when it comes to establishing this industry. And then I just keep watching.
Mr. Eliado, you're at your 2 minutes. Could you please wrap up your comments?
Yes, please. I'm please I'm willing and ready to basically speak on issues that we need to address to move on, to be able to make a clear pathway for people that were marginalized in this industry, that have experience to provide to this industry, because that's what we have done from the very beginning. And I believe that we should be able to still be financially stable and be able to also provide our experience with this industry, because we do everything but still don't have the capital. And to wrap it up. So I just like to say thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comments, sir. Please enjoy the rest of your day as well. BPS, do we have any other callers in the public comment line?
Yes, Chair. Caller with the last 3 digits of 740. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hi, this is Katree Saunders for the record, Katree, last name Saunders. And I would just like to thank you guys for your time and reiterate what Timothy Eliado had said. We have been here from the beginning and been disenfranchised, systematically left out, and we still have helped build an industry. And we are just asking to have a seat at the table, to sit down to speak to legislation and to get our viewpoint so that we can come to terms of what real social equity looks like in the state of Nevada. It includes ownership of dispensaries, labs, cultivation, also as well as lounges. We should not be left out in that discussion. To build sustainable generational wealth, these things are needed, just as they are in every other state with social equity. We can sit down with other lawmakers from Massachusetts, from California, that actually have these regulations put into place for social equity applicants. I think that would be helpful. So I would like to sit down this week in regards to this. Thank you for your time. This is Katree Saunders.
Thank you for your public comment, Ms. Saunders. BPS, is there anybody else for public comment this morning?
Chair, the public line is open and working. However, there are no further callers for public comment at this time.
Thank you, BPS. As always, appreciate your help in getting us through the callers on the line. I will close public comment. Anything else from committee members this morning? Don't see anything else. Obviously, it's been a very long week in Judiciary. So again, want to thank all of you. Our work is not yet done. Next week is likely to be just as busy, if not busier than this week. We have agendas out Monday through Thursday. There will be 8 o'clock starts each of those days. We have anywhere from 2 to 3 bills scheduled at the moment. And just so everyone knows, I do anticipate having a meeting on Friday. There will likely just be work session, and we might have several meetings on Friday. So we'll try to process bills as we can throughout the week, but please get some rest on this holiday weekend because we're probably going to need it next week. So again, thank you, Judiciary Committee. I hope you all have a great weekend, and we'll see you back here in this committee at 8 o'clock on Monday morning. This meeting is adjourned.